Susan B. Anthony was born into a Quaker family that believed in fairness and equality for all. At the age of 17, she started collecting signatures for petitions against slavery. In 1856, she became a representative for the American Anti-Slavery Society in the state of New York. Meeting Elizabeth Cady Stanton, in 1851, she met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who became her lifelong friend and partner in various social reform activities, particularly in the area of women's rights. Together, they founded the New York Women's State Temperance Society after Susan was not allowed to speak at a meeting about not drinking alcohol because she was a woman. Civil War and abolition. During the American Civil War, they established the Women's Loyal National League, which collected a massive number of signatures on petitions to end slavery. After the war, they formed the American Equal Rights Association, which worked for equal rights for both women and African Americans. They also began publishing a women's rights newspaper called The Revolution in 1868. Women's suffrage movements. In 1869, Susan and Elizabeth founded the National Woman Suffrage Association, which was part of a split in the women's rights movement. This split was resolved in 1890 when the group merged with another to form the National American Woman Suffrage Association, with Susan B. Anthony as a leading figure. Arrest and 19th Amendment. In 1872, Susan was arrested in her hometown for voting, which was illegal for women at the time. Her trial received a lot of attention, but she refused to pay the fine. In 1878, she and Stanton worked with Congress to introduce an amendment that would give women the right to vote. It became known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment and was eventually added to the U.S. Constitution as the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women the right to vote. Advocacy and international work. Susan traveled extensively, giving numerous speeches each year in support of women's suffrage and working on state campaigns. She also played a vital role in establishing the International Council of Women, an organization that still exists today. Additionally, she helped organize the World's Congress of Representative Women at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. Changing public perception. At the beginning of her activism, Susan B. Anthony faced ridicule and criticism, with some accusing her of trying to undermine marriage and societal norms. However, over time, public opinion about her changed. She received an invitation to celebrate her 80th birthday at the White House with President William McKinley. In 1979, her portrait appeared on a US dollar coin, making her the first woman to be featured on US currency. Susan B. Anthony's dedication and tireless efforts significantly contributed to the eventual achievement of women's suffrage in the United States. She remains an iconic figure in the history of women's rights and social reform. Susan B. She dedicated herself to understanding and advocating for various social issues. One notable aspect of her early advocacy was her adoption of the bloomer dress. The bloomer dress was a controversial outfit for its time, consisting of pantaloons similar to loose-fitting pants worn under a knee-length dress. Anthony believed that the bloomer dress was a more practical and sensible alternative to the traditional heavy, floor-length dresses that women typically wore. It allowed for greater freedom of movement. However, Susan B. Anthony's choice to wear the bloomer dress became a subject of attention and controversy. Some of her opponents seized upon her attire as a way to divert attention away from her ideas and goals. Instead of engaging with her ideas and her advocacy for social reform, they chose to focus on her unconventional clothing. Because of this distraction and to keep the focus on her work rather than her clothing, Susan B. Anthony reluctantly stopped wearing the bloomer dress after about a year. In essence, this passage highlights how Susan B. Anthony, as a determined and energetic social reformer, was willing to embrace unconventional ideas and attire in pursuit of her goals. However, she also recognized the importance of keeping the focus on the substance of her ideas, leading her to make the practical decision to return to more conventional clothing. In 1837, when Susan B. Anthony was just 16 years old, she started collecting petitions against slavery as part of a movement against a new law that banned anti-slavery petitions in the U.S. House of Representatives. By 1851, she played a significant role in organizing an anti-slavery convention in Rochester. Anthony was also involved with the Underground Railroad, helping a fugitive slave escape to Canada in 1861 with the assistance of Harriet Tubman. In 1856, she became the New York state agent for the American Anti-Slavery Society while still advocating for women's rights. Anthony organized anti-slavery meetings throughout the state, emphasizing immediate and unconditional emancipation. She also raised money for the family of John Brown, who was executed for leading a raid aimed at starting an armed slave uprising. Her fearless commitment to her beliefs led to opposition and disruptions at her meetings, culminating in mob violence in many places. Susan B. Anthony had a vision of an integrated society, which was radical at a time when the status of freed slaves was a topic of debate. She advocated for equal rights and access to education and employment for all, regardless of race. Anthony's advocacy for women's rights was closely tied to the anti-slavery movement led by figures like William Lloyd Garrison. However, there was tension between women's rights advocates and male abolitionists, who sometimes believed that the women's rights cause might hinder the fight against slavery. Anthony, Stanton, and others confronted such challenges in their pursuit of women's rights, even when it meant challenging prominent male abolitionists like Wendell Phillips and Horace Greeley. Despite these tensions, Anthony remained dedicated to the women's rights movement, emphasizing the importance of women doing their own work in their own way.